Hi everyone, I'm your host today, Kim Winter, Global CEO of Logistics Executive Group. Thanks for joining us today, and by all means have a look at Logistics Executive TV and check out the other podcasts that we're bringing you from business leaders around the world. As business leaders, we've been bombarded throughout the last few months with all this information about new norm, unprecedented times, uncertainties, and what have you moving forward. But how many of us have taken a step back and are really looking at how we're managing stress and helping others to manage stress throughout this period? Today, I'm joined by Matthew Johnstone, the Director of Drawn from Experience in Australia. Matt, welcome. You're in Sydney today.
Hey, Kim. Yep, I am, and it's winter.
I think it's pretty cold where you are. Matt, you're passionate about mental health and well-being. You're an advocate for a range of issues sitting all around that subject matter, and you're a very well-known author. You published sort of 9 or 10 books on that subject matter, and many of them being bestsellers, both in Australia and globally. We're really pleased to have you on board. I know that you've done a lot of work around stress and mental health and related issues over the last decade or two. So thanks for coming on board, and why don't you give us a bit of an entree about yourself and your background?
Well, thanks, and very nice to be here, Kim. Thanks for having me on board. That was a nice little intro. And look, my company's name is called Drawn from Experience, as you mentioned, and literally everything that I do is drawn by my own hand or drawn from my life. And my company's name could also be called Drawn from Experts, because I'm in a very unique position where I work alongside a lot of fabulous, fantastic mental health and wellbeing experts. And I basically take complex issues around mental health, resilience, stress, mindfulness, what have you, and I turn them into imagery. And I think what I've realized, and as I get older, that adults still love a picture book, and they still, and I think really at the end of the day, we can actually process an image up to 60,000 times faster than the written word. So, and really this all came from, I spent 15 years as a creative in advertising. And really that was all about how do you communicate simply and effectively. So what I've done is I've combined what I used to do in my job with life experience, but also not trying to sell cars or clothes, or trying to sell ideas on how people can live well.
Cool. So, I mean, you've had a vast array of experience, and you've also been involved in a number of pretty significant crises in the past. I mean, as I recall, reading some of your material in your bio, you happened to be in New York during 9/11. I mean, what was it? And pretty close to the centre of what was going on. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Well, that was a bit of a look. We all know what a horrible situation that was, and that was a bit of a, I guess, a tipping point for me. I was a creative director in New York. I was living, outwardly I was living the life and doing well and successful, and I was busy and flying everywhere. And inwardly, I was falling apart, and I was like a crapped out old plane that was held together with blue tack and sticky tape, and I was about to crash any minute. But because I was a guy, because of the industry I was in, because of my pride, my ego, I chose to ignore that, and I just kept on going until 9/11 happened, and I found myself a block from the World Trade Center when it came down. And I was one of those people who was covered from head to foot in ash. And, I even remember pulling bits of glass out of my hair. And so I was there. And look, we all know how terrible that is. And we're going through a terrible situation at the moment. But I guess that for me was my real wake-up call that life is very short. And we don't know what's around the corner, which is probably a good thing. But that was my real wake-up call, because I'd just been sort of peddling water, for years, I think, up until that point. And that made me just sort of, it was like the biggest psychological slap in the face for me, as I think it was for many people, and it just made me reassess my life and where I was going and how I was living my life. And look, it didn't happen overnight, but, it's sort of that was the start of it all, really.
I suppose when I think back, and I think we can all remember where we were when 9/11 happened. It was a real jolt. It was, hold on, this doesn't happen in the world, and this is New York, and how could this possibly be taking place? I think it sort of tripped things in various people's minds, and all of us, to say, well, what is reality? And some significant things can happen all of a sudden to change our reality. I guess if we segue to what's happening with the current scenario with the pandemic, this has been even more significant, of course, for more people, a broader effect, a massive impact right across the world, affecting just about everybody in some shape, way or form.
Yep.
What are your observations? I mean, you're very connected and support a lot of organisations and contribute to a lot of organisations, both from an industry or business perspective, but also from government and organisations helping people in the public sphere. What are you seeing as some of the most demonstrative effects of what's going on with COVID-19 now in terms of mindset and the way people are reacting and handling things?
Yeah, look, I think, as we all know, this has been a devastating pandemic. I heard the other day that there was because a lot of people, I'm doing a lot of this, a lot of Zooming and Zoom talks and meetings and everything, and this has become the new normal. But I think Canada did a PR communications around COVID, and they said, you're not working from home, you're actually staying at home because there's a global pandemic. And I think really, at the beginning of all this, I was like many people, I was totally discombobulated. I couldn't be bothered. I just felt like I wanted to sleep in the afternoon. And I didn't really know why. I was kind of going, what's going on? And, we had our kids at home and trying to get them motivated to do online learning, which, doesn't cut it. My daughter's very creative. She does a lot of art. So, doing art via a laptop doesn't really work. And I think, it's been very hard, and I know a lot of people have been really seriously impacted on their businesses, as I'm sure you do, Kim. And I think it's been a real wake-up call. Someone said on the radio the other day, it's like we've all been sent to our room to think about the error of our ways. And I think in many ways, on the upside, I think, there is some definite downside, and I think we're yet to see the end of it. But I think on the upside, one of the things that I've been hearing a lot about is that people have been forced to slow down. They didn't realise how manic they were, or how scheduled they were, or how much that time they spend in their commute. Some people, I was speaking to a mate the other day, and he said he actually feels more connected than he's been, because he's actually been checking in more on a deeper level than he had, which I thought was quite a nice insight. And I think, we as a family, and a lot of friends I know, we've been spending a lot less money because, nothing's been open. So we haven't been doing silly materialistic shopping, and we haven't been driving our cars. Our cars have just been virtually sitting standstill. I've been luckily teaching my daughter how to drive, so at least it's been getting a little bit of work out. But, so, there's been ups and downs, but I think, generally, I think we all know how bad it is. But I guess this is where we have to really look at what's important and who's important, and really work on ourselves, because in some ways there is opportunities when there is adversity, I guess. I
suppose that's your approach would be fairly indicative of the Kiwi ingenuity and finding a way through issues. I think as New Zealanders, one of the reputations that we do have, apart from being pretty good at rugby, is finding ways to solve problems and work with limited resources to achieve some great outcomes. And there's a range of Kiwis that are being well known in that sphere. You've done a lot of work, Matt, on stress and how to deal with stress. I've read a couple of your publications in prep for this today, which I knew existed, but I hadn't, to be honest, read in detail. I must admit I'm very impressed with the amount of referencing and the amount of work and scientific reading that you've done in regards to backing up your thesis and your stories. Tell us a little bit about why it's so important for us to be keeping tabs on stress and monitoring stress and finding ways of dealing with it. What are the issues there?
Well, look, I've had a fair amount of stress in my life, Kim, as you can tell by the colour of my hair. This is all natural, by the way. It's not out of a bottle. And I guess I think stress has always been one of those things that people have always, it's kind of like sleep. People don't take it too seriously. And I actually have since realised that stress is a very important thing to take very seriously, because it's one of the biggest precursors to a significant mental health or physical health issue. And some research was done at Harvard, and they said that I think 75 to 90% of visits to the GP, the underlying cause of the majority of those visits is stress. So whether your hair's falling out, whether you're grinding your teeth, whether you've got irritable bowel, whether you've got anxiety or depression or whatever it is, there is a very good likelihood that stress is the underlying culprit in this equation. So last year, I joined together with a guy called Dr. Michael Player, and thank you for the saying how much research I've done. It's really mostly his, because he's the clinical psychologist. I drew the pictures and wrote some of the stories. But so he's an expert around stress, and he's done a lot of work with fly in, fly out miners, and they're a subset of our society. I'm sure you've got a lot around the UAE, but they're a unique subset of society. So they had their own stresses about being away from home, or not melding with a community, or sleep deprivation, or being underground, or whatever it was. And so he found a lot of very interesting things around that. So we decided to take his research and what he'd found, and then we put it together for a book. Because I think, as I mentioned before, sometimes we just kind of go, we kind of go, well, I'm busy, I'm stressed, but we don't look at the ramifications and the problems that go with it. So it's really about that. And I've been quite surprised how much feedback I've had from this book of people going, I didn't realize how stressed I was. Yeah. So it's just, it's there. And I guess it's about tapping into that emotional intelligence and realizing what's going on.
It's great. I mean, there is a lot of work that you've produced, which is all about solutions. And I think, obviously, your expertise in artwork and the graphics that you produced is really great in making things simple and observable. I still recall when you and I got together during the GFC about 10 years ago in Sydney. And I think at that stage you were doing the artwork for The Black Dog, which I think is probably one of your most well-read and highest-selling publications.
Yeah, I have The Black Dog, yep.
Yeah. Yep. And I'm not too sure whether you're aware of this, but you actually gave me the original artwork for that book at the time, and it still is in my Sydney apartment. So I'm sure it's going to be worth a lot of money at some point.
Yeah. Put it on eBay, mate.
Yeah. But I mean, the Black Dog is a massive piece around the acknowledgement and understanding of depression. Of the way you brought it to life graphically is just stunning. And I've shared the video. I think you've had over 10 million views on your video of the Black Dog, which I think you've worked with the United Nations on and what have you. And I've shared
World Health.
Sorry?
World Health Organization.
Yeah, World Health Organization, sorry. And I've shared that with literally hundreds of people in the last few months to help them deal with, just when I picked up that there's a lot of stress, and whether it's depression or whether it's other significant manifestations of the anxiety that's taking place. I've shared that, and by the way, for the audience, if people want to look at that, by all means, we will share the link to that to that image and to that video to go out. So the point I'm getting to is, Matt, you've presented a whole range of graphic images and storylines around dealing with stress, but you run the whole supply chain and very much focus on the need for happiness and the ways of dealing with happiness and manifesting happiness. Tell us why being happy is so important.
Well, actually, I reckon not to disagree with you, but I think happiness is slightly overrated, because it's the one true core emotion that we actively seek out of all our emotions. And I think Years ago, I saw Dr. Martin Seligman speak, and he's a psychologist, and he is the founding father of positive psychology. And he, it's quite funny because he actually said himself that he's quite a grumpy old bastard. And but he said, happiness is like a cat. It's like you can call it as much as you like, but it won't come to you. But sometimes it drops into your lap unannounced, only to go away as quickly as it's landed. And I think, happiness, we're always seeking, everyone wants to be happy, that's just natural. And so do I. But I think it is fleeting. And I think what I really believe in, and what, Dr. Seligman also believes in, is well-being. And I think well-being is something that we can all work towards, and there's no quick potpourri remedy towards, having well-being in our lives, but there's a series of things that we can do that can bring about well-being. So, people, you can be in a wheelchair and have well-being. You can be have cancer and have well-being. You can be, all sorts of myriads of problems and still live with well-being. But I guess, and that's what a lot of people don't look for, and they're always kind of complaining about the now and always hoping that there's going to be a better there, when really all we have right now is what's going on for us right in this moment.
Okay.
I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate you sharing some of these insights with the audience, because from what I can see, anxiety and the level of stress is way up in a lot of places around the world. And I think you reflected back before that men pretty much have a much greater problem sharing their emotions and identifying what's going on than women. I think most men would acknowledge that, and certainly women would be aware of it as well. I recall, I don't know when it was, it would have been over 10 years ago, Australia was in a drought, as I recall, fairly substantial drought. And you were at the time on the speaking circuit, mainly in the big cities with big companies and what have you, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as I recall it, you decided to go out to the regions into the country in Australia, bearing in mind Australia is a very big country, about the same size as the US, but only about 25 million people or so. And you wanted to reach out because there was a lot of talk about serious mental health issues with the farming community and the rural community because they were under drought. There was a lot of hassle going on and financially and one thing and another. And I think you said at the time you went out there and you expected to go to a school hall somewhere and, it could hold about 50 people, and that you turned up to give a speech and weren't holding out much expectation that it was going to be much of a big thing. But as I recall at the time, and it was in the media, hundreds and hundreds of people turned up from that region. And the stories, you were there for days, as I recall it, because people had finally reached the point where, families were reaching out to farmers who were close to suicide, and there had been a lot of suicides in Australia at that time in the rural community. And you found it was a tipping point. Talk to us a little bit about that experience and what that really, triggered inside of you in terms of your thinking on this whole issue.
Well, look, my dad was a farmer, and he was a very much a steak and four veg kind of guy, and he was a great storyteller, but he had no insight into his own condition, and he had no understanding of how to articulate what might be going from it. And I think that's just not farmers; it's a lot of men in general. And I think one of the problems with farming is that we're not only isolated by the land, but they're also isolated by the culture. So it's, farmers, I love, because I grew up so often and so much of my childhood in New Zealand going to farms on holidays and stuff, I've got a real affinity with the land and so that's why I like working with them. And I think they're in a very difficult thing because they quite often spend a lot of time by themselves. And it's all totally dependent on the weather. So if the weather's terrible, if there's floods or fires or drought, that absolutely can stuff their whole livelihood. So I think, and someone said to me once, we've got to look after farmers because they are the ones who feed us. And I'd never heard it quite expressed like that. And I went, yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, they are the ones, you know, we just take going to the supermarket and getting our food for granted, but it's got to come from somewhere. So, you know, they need to be looked after. And I guess one of the things that I really loved about speaking to farmers or any sort of particularly blokey kind of community, like I've done a lot of work with professional sporting, you know, like the NRL in Australia or the police or the army or whoever. And what's quite funny is when they come in, they're all kind of like got their arms folded and they've got the shoulders up and they go, oh, what the hell is this going to be about? And I guess through, again, the power of imagery and the power of storytelling, by the end of it, they go, oh, that wasn't so bad, or that was quite interesting. And then my greatest aim in the work that I do and the talks that I give is I just purely want to kickstart an important conversation, you know, whether it's within the room or with their partners or their children, because sadly, when people are going through depression or anxiety, it's not just about them, you know, it's not just about how it affects them. It's really the ripple of the pond that goes out and affects all the people, you know, their partners, their children, the people that they have to work with, you know. So it's really important that people get, and I think once people realize that it's actually quite common, that it can actually be sort of nipped in the bud relatively quickly if we take the right steps and talk to the right people, it's not so bad, you know. It's just, again, a lot to do with shame. And shame and ego, I think, are the biggest roadblocks to dealing with any kind of mental health issue.
So are you seeing that issue of isolation that you saw and you've nominated with, regarding farmers? Are you seeing that sort of replicated because of the distancing and the remoteness of work at the moment this phase we're going through? Are you detecting, I know you're working with a whole range of groups at the moment, are you seeing those same sort of factors influencing business people and just general employees when they're disassociated from their work at the moment? Is that causing a similar sort of a stress level?
Look, I'm getting a bit of a mixed bag on messaging around that. You know, some people are loving it. You know, some people. I was just speaking to a woman this afternoon, and she lives up on the mid-central coast, and her commute into the city every day was 4 hours there and back, and so she's regained 4 hours of her every day. You know, and she's absolutely loving it, and she's got more time for herself. She's exercising more. She's got, you know, seeing friends and family and kids and so I think, you know, on that level, it's kind of good. I think I personally, you know, I love going to meetings and catching up with people and brainstorming and hatching plans and you know, delivering talks, because one of the things that I love about doing talks is I get to go to places that I'd never go on my own steam and, you know, that I'd never probably go otherwise, but I'm going there because, you know, and I get dropped into cultures or environments that I'd never typically go into. So I find that, you know, incredibly interesting, and that's what really drives me. So I've been truly missing that. But I guess, look, I think some people, in particular people who are doing business and they've got small children at home, has been a real challenge. Some people I've heard have got more time for blue sky thinking, being more efficient and more effective. And you know, I was doing some work with a video production company, and he said he's restructuring his whole business because everyone's actually working more efficiently and better and more creatively than they were when they're all in the office. You know, so they had a big open plan office. You know, so you know, I guess it's different strokes for different folks. How have you found it?
Look, you know, from our perspective and the sort of clients that we're talking to at the moment, and just with our own environment, I mean, we have a daily call with our various team members around the world every morning, which we never used to do. So from our perspective, look, internally within our organisation, in the various regions that we operate, it's actually enhanced the communication. And you're right. I mean, I think it's been through a phase. I think the initial phase was a bit of a shock and the uncertainty of, you know, when's all this going to go on till and what have you. But I think we got into a groove, and it's been the new norm for us, is the level of communication. In various cities around the world, of course, now we're allowed, where I happen to be at the moment in Dubai, 50% of staff are allowed back into the office. So we're in the office here today. but we're just as good working from home, and it's project based. And of course, there's a lot of discussion around, people being in a business or producing for that business, no matter where they are. Our clients all around the world, again, mixed bag. A lot of people who are more self-sufficient are quite happy to be working by themselves, are finding positive outcomes, more time with their children, greater opportunity to get focused on things around the house, those sorts of things. Yeah. Others that are more gregarious, much more so that they're missing that contact, and people who relied on the business that they're involved in for their communication and the water cooler talks and going to play cricket or whatever afterwards after work. It's a real mixed bag. So it's a real mixture. Yeah. And I guess, sorry, go ahead. You were going to ask me something?
No, I was just going to say we could put our house on the market at the moment because everything, garage is totally cleaned out, barbecue's immaculate, garden's perfect. So we had a lot of time to do that sort of stuff. But,
Totally. I mean, one of the things I was interested in, you are a notable speaker. I know you're a pretty humble guy, but you speak all over the world. You haven't been traveling lately, I take it. No. But, you've spoken at some of the biggest organisations around the world in terms of motivational speaking and subject matter around your specialisation. What are some of the things that organisations reach out to you to come and speak to them about? What's some of the more interesting subject matter that you get to talk about?
Well, look, I guess, I definitely try and stick within my realm of expertise or understanding. So I guess my key areas would be, mental health, obviously, resilience, stress, mindfulness. I've just been doing a thing called the MAP, which is all about my own journey, and how I got to do what I do, and so it's meaning, authenticity, and purpose, and a bit of gratitude. So, look, I think it's different strokes for different folks, but what I've found is that, we all differentiate ourselves by where we live and what we do, or how much money we earn, or the suburb we live in, or the country we live in, or whatever it is. And I guess at the end of the day, when you really knock all down the bridges and the facades and the cars and the watches and the, look at me and get down to the nub of the internals, we all want the same thing. We all want to have meaningful connections. We all want to have love in our lives. We all want to be happy. We want to live well. We want to grow old and have good mental and physical health. And I think, we all sort of deserve that on so many levels. And I guess a lot of people don't know how to do that. And I think we're getting a lot better at it. Quite often people say to me, is mental health getting better or worse? And I'd say it's both. I think, if you look at the statistics of people seeking help, it is definitely getting worse. But I think that in some ways is getting better because people are talking about it more and there is less shame, less stigma associated with it. So people are putting their hands up and getting the help they need. So, it swings and roundabouts. But I think, when I was in the peak of my depression, when I was going through it in New York, there was no, like we have here in Australia, like Beyond Blue or Black Dog Institute or the campaigns that the World Health Organization are doing. There was none of that. There was none of, we've got a really amazing thing here in Australia called Are You OK Day. There was none of that, and it was all just, it was a mystery, and it was a psychologist or psychiatrist or someone who's behind a closed door and I've got no idea what they do. And, so much shame associated with it. Now, if I was a president or prime minister of a country, I would make everyone go and have a bit of counselling because we've all got stories, we've all got baggage, we've all got crap going on in our lives, and that's just healthy. It is just healthy because the movies we play on our minds are bigger than IMAX, our surround sound, they're in 3D, and a lot of them are horror stories. And I think we play out those movies in the isolation of our own minds. And when we put some subtext to them and we shine some light on them and give them some air and talk about them, they're not the scary movies that they thought they were. So, it's just very important that we kind of have a bit of self-understanding and self-efficacy and emotional intelligence.
So emotional intelligence is something from, in the background of the part of our business, which is the executive search side, has been a major factor of what companies are looking for in leaders these days. yes, sure, people have got to have the technical skills and the general industry experience. Although I've got to say, in the current times, organisations are opening up to outside of, round pegs and round holes to thinking, okay, what are the transformational skills that I'm looking at? What are the emotional capabilities that I'm looking at in leaders that can take us through this really dynamic phase that we're now going through, where a lot of business modelling has changed, and the ways we do things, supply chains are changing, business structures are changing. And we're running a series on all of that in terms of business modelling and corporate advisory and what have you, with another Australian-based specialist as well, Dom Rigo. But from your perspective, you talk about the need for people to acknowledge and open up and communicate. I think that resonates with anybody who's honest with themselves and honest with those around them. What are the tips from your perspective as to how people, if they have been closed, like many people in the world are very hesitant, whether it be cultural or whether it would just be personal or national sort of habits of not being as open and as communicative as they need to be. What are some of the tips for you to start that journey for people who have got anxiety, or they're stressed or they're depressed, to one extreme or another along that spectrum? What should people start thinking about doing to reach out to change that situation?
Well, I guess the question is, I put up with my black dog for probably nearly half my life. And just to give you a little background, my oldest brother is a psychiatrist. My middle brother did clinical psychology, and my mother did art therapy.
Wow.
So you'd think that I would know better.
You would. You should be a specialist. Hey, Matt, tell us a little. Tell the audience about the black dog just for a minute here, because it's a fantastic concept. Which again, we were happy to share the story of the black dog with people connected to this. But tell people about that black dog concept.
Well, I've got to say firstly that people have said to me, "What have you got against black dogs?" Absolutely nothing. I love black dogs. But really, and look, and to be totally honest with you, I didn't come up with the concept. It's actually been around since ancient times. It was either a black dog or a black fog. And it's really just a metaphor around, the fact that it'll follow you, it'll dog you. And it really, Winston Churchill, he talked about his black dog because he was quite famous for his depression. And the Black Dog Institute, which is part of the University of New South Wales here in Sydney, their logo is Winston Churchill's V for Victory, and the shadow of the hand is actually, I'm not doing a very good dog shadow here, but is the dog. So it's about, victory over adversity. And I think, so for me, it really is something that if you don't take care of, if you don't show discipline, if you don't show it compassion, if you don't embrace it, own it, There's a picture that I did years ago of the black dog of embracing it, which seems like the total opposite of what we should be doing, because our natural reaction is to run away from it, is to drink ourselves or to distract ourselves or to gamble or to fly around the country, whatever it is, to do, look at our phones, and really what we do need to do is we need to sit with it and own with it, and because the sooner that we can accept what is, the sooner we can actually start to move through. And a big part of the problem is, again, that whole, I'm a male, I'm the hunter-gatherer, I'm speaking of my business, my ego, what are people going to think of me, losing responsibilities and all these sort of things. And I think the sooner that we can, that's not to say that you should go on social media and go, hey, look at me, I'm depressed. It's really about finding the right context and the right help at the right time, because that can make all the difference in the world. And as I like to say, there is no shame whatsoever in seeking help. The only shame is you're going to miss out on life. And, I realize now life, when we not in the pandemic, is pretty good. So, it's different strokes. Sadly, we don't start looking, a lot of people don't look after their heart until they've had a heart attack, or they don't, stop drinking until they've got cirrhosis of the liver. So sometimes, sadly, we need to fall down before we realize what it's all about.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and very sage words. So really appreciate you sharing that. We've got a big business audience, obviously, for these podcasts, and you talked about the issue of resilience before. Maybe a reflection from you on your view around some ideas about what business leaders should be doing right now in terms of, we talk about the economic issues, we talk about the business and commercial issues around business. What should leaders be doing to think about this whole issue of mental fitness and mental healthiness, and the resilience that they should be, the issues they should be looking at in relationship to resilience of their business? What things should they be looking out for in their business with their people who may be suffering from, to one extent or another, mentally during this period? What are some of the things leaders should be thinking about?
Well, look, to be honest with you, Kim, I'm not an exec businessman, but I guess, what I'd say to them is to, take the pulse, the wellbeing pulse of your company, the organisation that you're working for. Talk to as many people as you can. Listen to what's going on, because I think if you ask, people will tell you. And I think, it was really interesting. A couple of years ago, I went to do a talk for a mortgage broking company in Perth. And they had just gone through a major restructuring where they spent a lot of time and importance on the well-being of their people. And they didn't really put it to a vote, but they did a lot of roundtable workshops, and they said, what do you want? And funnily enough, one of the first things on the list was to get rid of business attire. So if you weren't client-facing, you could come to work, smart, but, relaxed. And I just remember that really stood out for me. And I know that wouldn't be applicable to a lot of businesses, but it shifted the whole vibe and culture of the place. Everyone was suddenly a bit more relaxed. Suddenly people could be a bit more expressive about who they were. They were happy about it. And the other things they brought in was, flexibility, working from home, obviously. And then they started bringing in, things like, programs around mindfulness, meditation, bringing people, teaching how to eat well, because, our diet can have a really big impact on how we feel. They brought in sleep specialists. So, as I mentioned before, there's no silver bullet. There's no quick get out of jail free card. It's really a potpourri of all those things. Exercise groups. So look, I think if you're a really good proactive CEO or business manager and you really care about your people, there's a lot of very small things that you can do. And to me, I keep saying it's not rocket science. It's not that hard to make people feel appreciated, that you are looking out for them. And because, a business or a workplace is only as good as the people that work for it. So, if you invest in them, they will return the favor,
Yeah, no, I get it. And you were talking earlier about this link between mental fitness and physical fitness. Big link, right? A lot of research around that, linking those two.
Yeah, look, I did a talk years ago in a place, Byron Bay, which is a lovely beachside area in New South Wales. And there was a guy there called Professor Rob Donovan, who he's a senior lecturer in the University of Western Australia. And he did research around the words mental health. And I don't know if you know this, Kim, but the words mental health were actually designed to soften the impact of mental health. So, and so what he did was he was curious to see what people thought about these two words, and so he put it out into the research mill, and what came back was really negative. So, things like stigma, instability, madness, schizophrenia, bipolar, depression, all these labels, and labels are very, very powerful things. And they stick, sadly. And so what he did was he tweaked the words mental health, and he turned it into mentally healthy. And then he put that back into the research mill, and what came back was genuinely really positive. So mentally healthy is exercising, it's eating well, it's sleep hygiene, it's having a good conversation, or help seeking, and or mindfulness, And so, there's a lot of mental health institutions in Australia now that speak a lot about being mentally healthy. And for me, when I'm doing a talk, I always say, don't do as I did, do as I do. Because I think at the end of the day, understanding, statistics and mental health issues and the rates of depression and anxiety and suicide rates is important, but I still think that prevention is the greatest cure. Don't get there in the first place. Know the signs, know the symptoms. We have this amazing, this comes back to the stress equation. We have this amazing smoke alarm within us, or an air raid siren that alerts us that things aren't going well, but quite often we stuff pillows over it, or we suppress it, or we don't talk about it, or we do avoidance activities, and eventually it will find its way out. It'll express its, it's a very sneaky thing, and it'll express itself in other ways, whether it's a mental health issue or a physical health issue. So it's just really important to sort of listen more and change the direction as quickly as possible.
Okay. Yeah, I hear what you're saying in regards to that, because what we're seeing more and more of our clients really focusing on surveys within organisations, making sure that, if you take some of the tech companies in particular have been well known for many years, and a lot of smart companies these days are providing that well-being and that wellness aspect to the work environment. And now, of course, we've got a whole new game changer taking place where, we just opened up all the offices and put all these beanbags everywhere and had massively comfortable places with childcare facilities. And now everybody's working from home. So now there's another game change happening there again. You were talking about the issue of, the smoke alarm going off and things to look for. If people are reasonably insular and not used to really reacting and dealing with those sorts of issues and wanting to bring them to the surface, what's your recommendation? Where should they go? Who should they talk to? Is it should they go to a specialist? Should they talk to the people closest to them? What are the channels?
Look, I'm a big believer of, talk to your family or your nearest and dearest, but don't dump all your crap onto your friends and your family. I think that's what professionals are for. That's why they're there. That's their expertise. And I think, yes, by all means, tell people that you're not coping, or, but I guess back to that emotional intelligence, it's just sort of about, to me, I suffered so incredibly for a long time because I wasn't being honest to myself, and I didn't want to believe it. I thought that I was bigger than it, that I was faster than it, I was cleverer than it, that I could outrun it. And I kept self-sabotaging my life, my relationships, my work because of it. And it was just a futile war. Sigmund Freud said, having depression is like going to war with yourself. And that's exactly what I did, and it wasn't until I, fully embraced what it was and really owned it and really went, stuff you, I'm taking back my life, and I really stood up to it, and I actually got angry with it, and I really, I literally fought for my life. And it wasn't until that point that I kind of fully accepted what it is, because as I mentioned before, I've got a family of academia who really understands this stuff, but again, it was that ego and being a guy that really got in the way, and the industry that I was in that really got in the way of me sort of dealing with it. And it took a long time. And I say, you don't need to do that. There is a really strong belief that, the research actually shows that the majority of mental health issues like mild to moderate depression and anxiety has the highest recovery rate out of any comorbid disease that faces us as humans.
Wow.
And I only heard that last year, and I've been in the space since 2005, and I went, well, that's what needs to be sung from the rooftops, because people quite often think this is a life sentence, But the thing is, if you have the right conversations, if you seek the help, if you make some small to minor changes in your life, like exercising more, sleeping more, not spending so much time looking at the terrible news on your phone, practicing a bit of mindfulness, all those sort of things that I've mentioned before, we can get through it. Professor Gordon Parker, who started the Backlog Institute, he said if you do all those things, you can get back to a level of normalcy within 6 to 8 weeks, which is doable for most of us. So look, we've still got a long way to go and getting these sort of communications out there, but it's just great that we're having chats like this, Kim. So, this is where ideas happen.
Awesome. Well, Matt, you've made a major impact over many years in this whole area of study and communication around stress, resilience, anxiety, depression, right across the board, not only in the APAC region but globally. So kudos to you. I appreciate the work that you've been doing. Really interested to see what you're going to be coming up with next, because you're an evolving story in terms of your thinking and your research and the work that you're delivering. I know it's had massive effects, and you're one person that I've been speaking to that I know has saved a lot of lives. So it's probably something that not everybody can lay claim to. So, but again, really do appreciate your honesty. I mean, I think there wouldn't be a person who couldn't honestly say they can reflect either personally or somebody very, very close to them that is experienced or is experiencing similar issues that you've discussed and brought out into the table for us today. So respect to you, acknowledgement for that. Really do appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And I'm sure you join with me in thanking Matthew Johnstone for what he's doing. Look forward to the new work coming out. Thanks, everybody, for spending time with us. Again, traditionally, we offer our respect and our thanks to everybody who's out on the front lines, the care workers, the mental healthy workers, and it's a new word that we're using from now on. Mental healthy, never again will I mention mental health, I promise. But to all the first responders, to everybody in the supply chain logistics world, getting things back to where we want to get them in terms of activity across the world, making sure that everybody has got a positive outlook on life. Thanks, everybody. We look forward to talking to you again soon. And thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks for having me, mate.
Cheers, mate.